The boy did not shout. He did not cry. He did not run. He simply stood there with dust on his shoes and fear in his chest, as 2,000 roaring Hells Angels motorcycles formed a wall of steel and thunder in front of him. And in that frozen second, when engines growled like an approaching storm, and grown men twice his size waited to see if he would break, the entire road seemed to hold its breath, because sometimes the bravest moment in a life is when a child refuses to step aside. Before this story goes any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of standing up for what is right, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe to the channel for more real and emotional stories like this. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because stories like this connect hearts across the world. The boy's name was Ethan Carter, and the land beneath his feet was not valuable because of oil, gold, or development potential, but because it held the last living memory of his family, a stretch of dry earth on the edge of a forgotten town where his father had taught him how to plant seeds, where his mother had been buried beneath an old oak tree after sickness took her too early, and where silence still carried the echo of laughter that once filled their small wooden house before life fell apart. Ethan was only 14, too young to understand contracts and laws, but old enough to understand loss, because after his father died in a construction accident, everything began to slip away piece by piece, the house condemned, the bills unpaid, the relatives uninterested, and finally the land itself claimed by men in suits who never once asked what it meant to the boy who slept in a rusted trailer nearby and visited the oak tree every morning before school. The Hells Angels came not because of Ethan, but because the land had been bought by a powerful biker chapter looking to build a massive clubhouse and highway stop, a place of pride, territory, and legacy for men who live by loyalty and respect. And on that day, they arrived in numbers so large it felt unreal. Black leather, red and white patches, faces hardened by years on the road, engines aligned like an army ready to roll forward and claim what was now legally theirs. Ethan had known they were coming. The town had whispered about it for weeks, warning him to stay away, telling him he could not fight men like that. But grief has a strange way of turning fear into stubborn courage. And so he walked to the dirt road before sunrise, stood exactly where the old fence used to be, and decided that if the land was going to be taken, it would not be taken without someone remembering who it once belonged to. As the first bikes appeared on the horizon, Ethan's legs trembled so badly he thought he might collapse. Memories flooding his mind of his father's hands guiding his on a shovel, of his mother's smile under the oak tree, of promises whispered into the soil that this place would always be home. And when the sound grew louder and louder, drowning out his thoughts, he closed his eyes for a brief second and told himself that even if he lost everything, at least he would not lose himself. The bikers slowed as they saw him, confusion rippling through the formation, engines still rumbling but momentum fading, because no one expected a skinny boy with dirt-stained jeans and a faded hoodie to stand alone in front of 2,000 men known across the country for their power and reputation. Ethan did not raise his fists or block the road physically. He simply stood his ground, shoulders squared, eyes lifted, a quiet defiance that felt heavier than any weapon, and that image alone began to crack something inside the men watching him. Some laughed at first, others shook their heads, a few felt irritation, but none of them moved forward, because there was something unsettling about a child who did not beg, did not threaten, and did not step aside. Minutes passed, stretching into an unbearable silence broken only by engines idling, and during that silence, stories began to surface quietly among the bikers, memories of their own childhoods, of places taken, families lost, moments when no one had stood up for them, and the road that led them to become who they were. The chapter president, a man named Marcus Hale, with silver in his beard and scars mapping his arms, eventually rode forward, not aggressively, but slowly, studying Ethan's face not as an obstacle but as a question. And though no words were exchanged, something profound happened in that moment, because Marcus saw not a challenge to authority, but a boy guarding a grave, guarding love, guarding a promise made to parents who could no longer defend themselves. The struggle for Ethan was not just against the bikers, but against the crushing reality that the world rarely stops for grief, that paperwork often outweighs memories, and that children like him are expected to accept loss quietly. But as the sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down, the standoff continued, and the boy's courage became impossible to ignore. Some bikers turned off their engines, others removed their helmets, the noise fading into something more human, more reflective, and the land itself seemed to speak through the stillness, reminding everyone present that territory is not just lines on a map, but stories written into soil by ordinary people who love deeply. The turning point came not with violence or shouting, but with humility, as Marcus dismounted his bike and walked the distance between power and vulnerability, kneeling briefly near the oak tree. Reading the small handmade wooden marker Ethan had carved with his father's old tools, and in that quiet act, the decision was already made. The bikers did not leave immediately, but the energy shifted, the formation breaking, men dispersing across the land not to claim it, but to understand it, to see the house ruins, the garden rows, the places where a family once lived fully, and by the time the engine started again, they did so with a different purpose. Over the following weeks, something extraordinary unfolded. As the Hells Angels chapter worked behind the scenes, lawyers rewriting contracts, funds quietly transferred, paperwork reversed, not as charity, but as respect, and the land was returned to Ethan legally, permanently, with protections, ensuring it could never again be taken from him without his consent. They helped rebuild the house, repaired the fence, restored the oak tree's surroundings, and even set up a trust for Ethan's education, not seeking recognition, not asking forgiveness, simply acknowledging that strength means knowing when not to take what you can. Ethan's life did not magically become perfect, grief did not disappear, and the scars of loss remained, but something inside him changed forever, because he learned that standing still in the face of overwhelming force can sometimes move mountains. And the men who once looked like monsters from a distance became unlikely guardians of his future. As years passed, the land became a symbol, not just for Ethan, but for the bikers too. A reminder of the day 2,000 powerful men were stopped, not by law or violence, but by the quiet courage of a boy who refused to step aside. If this story has touched your heart even a little, if it reminded you of someone you have lost or a place you fight to protect, please take a moment now to like the video, share it with others, and leave a comment, because your engagement helps stories like this reach people who need them most. And before this story ends, we ask you to comment one word that describes how this made you feel, because sometimes a single word can carry the weight of 1,000 emotions. And as the camera fades on, Ethan standing taller beneath the oak tree, no longer alone, the message lingers quietly but powerfully that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it simply stands still and refuses to move.